Black Myth Wukong is currently in the process of having a global concert tour, which is really freaking cool. They just finished up an LA concert and they're moving over to Carnegie Hall and doing a New York City concert, which is really exciting. I wasn't able to attend to either of these, so the team was nice enough to send me some clips from the LA concert. Now, of course, the recordings that we have here are not optimal for seeing the best of how this experience would be. That obviously is retained for when you go to a concert in person, but still, I think it's pretty cool that we were given the opportunity to at least be able to see a little bit of what this concert experience was like in LA, and certainly would be really fun to go see live, frankly. So the first thing that I think is really, really cool, and I've attended a few video game music concerts, is it doesn't look like there's a click track. And you may ask yourself, well, what is a click track? Well, a click track is a track on the conductor's stand that will essentially allow the conductor to follow along with the visuals based on cues. Usually there's an earpiece, there you hear the click, and everything is very metronomic and exactly as it should be for the concert experience. Now, interestingly enough, based on what it looks like here, there could be, I actually don't know if there is one or not, but it looks like he is turning pages. What's really cool about this is that here we have this freedom to essentially express and be flexible in our presentation of the music. And so yes, there is a visual component, which is a key standard part of the video game music concert experience. However, it does allow a little bit of flexibility when it comes to this orchestra expressing itself through the emotion of the music, right? And I'm looking, and no, I mean, we open up the score and we start at page 1, which is really cool. And I'm assuming this is going to be the opening of the game. Yes, okay. And I'm assuming that it was just following the chunks of the big moments of Black Myth Wukong's musical storytelling. Yes. Okay. Sick drums. So the one thing I ask myself when I am watching a concert like this is I'm immediately glued to what is happening on the screen. I'm not actually watching the instrumentalists. I'm watching the cutscene. That being said, there is a really cool thing that happens in these concerts based on my own experiences, where when you're there, the vibration of this concert space and the vibration of the orchestra and the vibration of the drums and the percussion and the brass and all that other stuff, that stuff kind of like enters your bones because it's loud. And there's this kind of spatial feeling of being connected to the music in a different way than if you're simply listening to it in your home over the album or the radio or the speakers. You know what I mean? Like there's a freedom that comes that with this music that kind of carries us beyond what we're seeing, and it actually makes the experience almost 3D, or like, you know, it accesses a whole new dimension for us. And that sounds kind of crazy, but I really mean it. There's a really beautiful thing that occurs when you're experiencing something live. The energy is different. It's a really palpable feeling that I hope that those of you that haven't experienced a live concert ever or yet can, because I do think that it's a very, very cool part of this. The one thing I want to think about and talk about is the idea that why do we need the screen? You know, and I think in the case of Black Myth Wukong, I think that this music really, really does a great job of serving the action that is occurring on screen the whole time. And so while I think it's good music, and some of it is different, like some of the interlude pieces I think are fine without context, I do think that, like in the case of this, I actually think that the context really does help. Like having the visual of the giant axe and the giant beings here, that all serves the music, and the music serves them and the circumstances. I was just imagining, like, what would it be like if you just couldn't see it? You know, like what happens if you don't have the screen? Well, I think people would still be able to imagine or transport themselves to a new area. I don't think that they would necessarily see the footage of the game in their mind's eye. I think that they would have to be forced to create, you know, from a feeling of imagination. Now, obviously, the visual reference here is really helpful, and I think it's an important part of the video. I mean, after all, it's a visual medium. Of course, there's the gameplay element that you wouldn't have here. So I think that this works, but I do think that it's kind of interesting what happens when you remove this part and are, you know, forced to really interact with the music. So this isn't like a detriment to this, and this is standard protocol, but it does make me think, like, why do we do this? Is it because the modern audience can't think outside the box of like what they have seen? Or is it, you know, the visual aid because the music complements that visual? It all depends on your own perspective. Personally, because of my background, it's not something I necessarily need, but obviously everything is heightened with context, as is the case with so many things. This is extremely cool. How often do we hear this particular instrument, the san chuan, I believe? How often do we hear this instrument? I mean, never. We don't. Simply, we don't. In the West, we never hear this instrument. And frankly, I don't even know how often we hear it in China. Like, it's what's amazing to me is this particular scene right here. So here we have a soloist that's playing an instrument that may or may not be popular or necessarily relevant in modern day discussion, right? In terms of instrumentation. And we have a full orchestra. So the East and West balance there. What I find really cool is the fact that this is a cultural exchange. What that means to me is that we have an instrument and that people in the audience may have no like connection to. And it's the same thing with Black Myth Wukong itself. I was exposed to Black Myth Wukong, the story of Black Myth Wukong, because of this game, right? And while I don't necessarily have a deep or expansive knowledge of it, I am at least aware that this story exists and it's relevant and important to a large group of people. And what's amazing to me is that here we have this Western orchestral sound mixed with this Sanxuan, and that combination is so unique and really kind of revolutionary. And I think part of the reason why video game music in some ways doesn't have the barriers or the hangups that a lot of other music in the classical space does, because it's all based around classic ideas. Here we have merger of two unique styles of sound, one that is more familiar to us and one that isn't as familiar to us, at least in the West. This is the bringing of the gifts, right? This is the bringing of the culture. This is the opening of the hearts and minds. This is the exploration of what else is available to us out there. The world is massive. And if we only focus on the tiny little part that we know, then we are denied this great and vast exploration of society and culture and, you know, all these buzzwords that I think actually still have a ton of meaning. Just reflecting and talking a little bit about the sanxian, though, I think it's worth noting how important this instrument is and part of the modern Chinese culture and the cultural heritage of China. What's pretty cool here is that, as you can see in this footage, I mean, this is fairly recent. And in this particular instance, we have a form, a shanbei shuoshu, which is a genre similar to Chinese rap. What's pretty cool is that while we have the sanxuan or the pipa, we're also improvising vocals and things. And I think what's really interesting to me is how much this sanxuan has retained its cultural relevancy and cultural identity in China, mostly because we're borrowing ideas of cultural identity and folk identity. And now, mind you, that folk stuff is passed down from person to person. So this sustained structure needs to exist enough and be interesting enough so that it's carried down by person to person and spread throughout the populace. It's pretty cool to see that the sanxuan is still a relevant musical instrument and still pretty important. And it's amazing to see it in Black Myth Wukong, and especially interesting to see it here as it is on stage. And I think this is actually probably the most interesting part for me, is the technique and the ability that goes into playing this, because it's just not something that we're typically used to, certainly not in the West. But I find it really interesting to see on stage in a modern scenario. And even the singing style for in this case the headless player, well, although in this particular instance he has a head, as you can see, that is such a unique sound. It may be off-putting at first, but the thing is, like, that's actually like a folk, like a thing that is learned, that is passed down, that is a known part of a cultural experience. I didn't know about this before hearing it in Black Myth Wukong. And so imagine hearing that live. Imagine you have no frame of reference. Imagine that you're a fan of the game, or maybe you've not even played the game and you're like, oh, I'll go with my friend to this concert. And you are shown this. Now, your instinct may be to sort of recoil and be like, well, my ears are not used to this. I've never heard this before. But that's okay. You know, that's the way that we push past our boundaries and our barriers, and we're exposed to new and interesting things that may actually change our perspectives. It goes for playing video games that you don't know. It goes to listening to music you don't know. Culturally, this is the exchange of ideas, and it's a really important part of this. And I think one of the things that makes a concert like this so incredibly interesting, because we are free from the confines of our homes, and instead we are essentially forced to meet culture head on. It's a beautiful thing to hear this particular instrument with this orchestra. And how often do these players play with this particular instrument? Probably not very frequently, if ever. Right? And so even for them, let's say they're really, really well-versed orchestra musicians, which they are because they sound great. You know, this is a continuation of exploring music and art and craft. And without waxing too poetically, I think it's a really interesting thing. I also wanted to talk about singing. Here's an example of something I've done thousands of times, which is sing with an orchestra. This is an opera aria, but in Chinese and with a full orchestra. Like, there's no difference based on like singing in a separate aria from like Giacomo Puccini's La Bohème or this. And it's really unique and I think kind of special that we're able to take, you know, these parts of this game, again, mixing and matching culture and ideas and identities and combining them. And I think that that's really excellent. Like, this is a great singer. This is really, really, really cool because it goes beyond the game. This is unique. This is a unique experience to this game. But also hearing this live is gorgeous. And there's this kind of balance between a singer singing in a classical way in Chinese, but then also a full orchestra playing music written by Chinese composers. I mean, like, that's the thing. At this point, it is its own entity. It's not opera. It's not classical music. It's a fusion, and that's really special. I mean, to see that live. Now, yeah, it does get really loud in this recording, so it's not really a great representation of it. But either way, like, this is the kind of stuff that really jazzes me up because it defies what we think we know about music and about structures and about these boxes that we put everything in. There was one more thing I really wanted to highlight, and it was this amazing singing for this particular interlude. There's a quality in this vocally that I think is really, really interesting, and I want to share with you and just talk a little bit about it. So this vibrato-less style of singing is incredibly difficult. Not only that, because of the consonants, there's a real sharpness in each da ba ba pi da di da ba ti. That kind of sharpness that exists within that is incredibly difficult. And what's interesting is that we're not relying on vibrato to produce a tone that is beautiful or clean. It becomes clean by way of stripping back the vibrato and leaning into pointed consonant use and strong body support. When you shoot up into the upper register like this, you inevitably, if you're not pointing in a very specific way, this sound actually will usually dip in pitch and end up sounding flat. So it requires a ton of diaphragmic and physical body support and leaning into the notes and also like a launching off platform. And usually that launching off point will stem from the consonants. The consonants are a huge part of this process. You usually even want to consider the consonants coming before the note. And what that does is it helps to sustain vocalic clarity. It also allows for when the vocal cords close and they come together, that also helps in this process of being able to deliver something in a pointed way. And it's more complicated than that. But in essence, that is the process with which we are able to deliver these really, really powerful notes. And on top of that, I think what's really interesting is that we have to throw it against the wall. You know, it's a proclaimed, loud, pointed sound that its intent is to cut through and cut above and go beyond an orchestra. And I think it has a real powerful, tribalistic, almost animalistic sound quality to it of rawness, which I think we lose when we lean too far into vibrato and a production quality, if that makes sense, where we're making sure that everything is in the perfect placement, so on and so forth. This is much more almost a more honest sound, and it's really quite effective. And then what's amazing to me is simply the enthusiasm. Listen to this curtain call. I hate to say it, but classical music concerts are not like that. Yes, there's enthusiasm. Yes, there's excitement. Yes, there's, joy. But this is a ruckus crowd that is just so happy to be there and happy to experience something. The thing is, video game music concerts are just a different experience. Seeing something live is a different experience than playing it in your home, obviously. But there's something absolutely magical about this. Gathering with a bunch of people, listening to a soundtrack from a game live that you may or may not know, and allowing yourself to be transported to that gaming experience. There's something about it, and something about the vibration of the orchestra, the way that all this, this music, these instruments carry themselves to you from the real people playing them. It takes over. And that's why there's so much enthusiasm, because there's a learned experience from having played the game. And then also there's like the freshness of seeing it in a new way, because it's not identical to playing a game at all. And if you've never been to a concert, you really should. The Black Myth Wukong tour is happening right now. You can check it out in the description below. I'm really grateful that they sponsored me for this, and I wish I could have gone to this live, because this is a really unique experience that doesn't come around often. I was in a Chinese New Year concert in Atlas Tully Hall, which is in Lincoln Center, and it was really, really cool to experience this combination of instruments and musical landscapes that honestly I wasn't privy to. I sang with a wonderful choir from a very small remote village from China that had flown all the way to New York City. And that was a crazy experience. There was a ping pong orchestral piece that was played with ping pong on the table, like on the thing. These experiences shape us as audience members, but certainly as performers as well. It's very, very cool that they're doing this. And I love, 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 love seeing video game music orchestra fans stand up out of their chairs, clap and scream and holler. That's the sign of something that reaches people way more than if they were just sitting at home listening to the music and experience the game themselves. So thank you very much, and I'll talk to you later.